Thank you.
Thank you, Gil.
You know, just to Paul's comment about living your values, I was driving a few days ago with my wife, and we were talking about a variety of different things, and she asked me, what will you, me, tell our daughter on November 8th? Does anybody think about November 8th, the elections, the midterm elections? Just raise your hands if it's on your agenda. All of you, pretty much. And so thank you. And I thought for a few moments, and I said, have optimism. Now that's very hard. That's a very hard concept right now. Since probably about the last, I'd say, 7 or 8 years, this nation has become highly fragmented, tribal even. And that tribalism has, as Jen talked about earlier today, made it very hard at times for people to open up their hearts and listen to one another. Sometimes almost impossible. But the reason I told my wife, and I will tell my daughter on November 8th, be optimistic, is because of the relationship I've forged with these 5 panelists in the past weeks. As to Paul's comment, we explored the true theme of the Provoke Global Summit, which was purpose. These are 5 extraordinary people of purpose. I want to introduce them going left to right and let them reveal for you why you should be optimistic, why you should lean into the institutions that you're connected to, and you should feel courageous in raising your voice internally. If you're in the right community, these are the right communities, raising your voice internally to let people know, people of influence know what your needs are. So first, it's a real pleasure for me to introduce Camille Johnston. She is a senior vice president with Siemens. Siemens is a 175-year-old multinational corporation. She has locations in the United States that pretty much probably touch almost every state, if I'm not mistaken. She's working with colleagues around the world. Siemens is probably in almost every country in the world. It's really evolved into a massive technology, supply chain, information, data company that's powering many other companies. Camille also has an incredible background because, like our earlier speaker, Jen, actually spent a number of years in the White House in positions of importance, of influence, but we won't go there because we're going to focus on Siemens and her game-changing efforts in Siemens. With me here is Andrew Flegel. Andrew is the president and CEO of the Consortium of Universities of the Washington metro area. Actually, you may not think of it, here we are in Washington. The area's largest employer is, I believe, probably government and academia. Is that correct, Andrew?
That's correct.
That's correct. Candace Dixon is really doing groundbreaking work, the hardest work. She and Andrew both lead forms of coalitions. One's a consortium, one's a coalition. They're both collaborative efforts of many players. She is leading a group of Fortune 100 companies to address one of the thorniest issues we face, both racial inequity and racial equity in terms of economics, and also gender disparity. And we're going to talk a bit about that. Then, if you haven't guessed where Elizabeth Owen is from, she'll model, I will model. I'm wearing Levi's 505s. She obviously is tired. Are the shoes from Levi's as well?
Not the shoes.
Okay, you'll come up with it. Everything else. Elizabeth is the vice president of communications, and she is rallying Levi's on very critical issues. She is the, I would say, you could say indirectly, the chief listening officer of employee communications for Levi's. And at the end, Peter Finn. Peter Finn is the founder and CEO of Finn Partners. It's a very interesting concept because he launched it based on a social experiment, you could say, that he found in Hunter, New York, where he lives. It's a rural community. It was once one of the poorest communities, not the, but one of the poorest communities in New York State. And he's going to explore with us what it is to see despair, desperation, and death, and how that changed his life in terms of why he wanted to create an organization like Finn Partners. So welcome. And I'm not going to put you on the spot, but maybe I will. We'll see. We'll see. So I wanted to sort of explore initially this concept of not government failing us, because government isn't failing us. Government is really struggling for people to come together in a bipartisan, nonpartisan way. And that's suddenly a challenge of the last decade, perhaps. It's always existed, just more visible now, perhaps because of media, social media. But I wanted to jump in and ask you, and I'm going to start with you, Camille, because you know government well, and now you have this C-suite role within Siemens. How do you, as an executive who sits at that executive table, look at issues and decide to raise voice and say, look, it's complex, we're a multinational company, we've got multiple locations, we have to deal with this issue. And one issue that comes to mind, maybe you'll share a little bit about this, is gender equity within the company in terms of the workforce, particularly women in the workforce today. Could you reflect on that for us?
Sure. So I would make the distinction between government and politics, because I think government is a very different institution than politics, which is kind of driving a lot of the fervor that we're seeing in the tribalism that you referenced. When you work for a multinational, it's not just what's going on in your government or your country that impacts the company. You're having to take into account what's going on in a lot of other countries, geopolitics in particular. Gender equity is definitely something that the company is addressing from a global headquarters standpoint. It's very much a focus of how they're managing boards and things like that out of Germany. And so there is a trickle down around gender equity. Here in the US, we're actually in a very different position from a gender equity standpoint. 11 of the 28 positions on our US leadership team are filled by women, including the CEO, the CFO, the head of corporate technology, the head of smart infrastructure, the head of IT. I mean, substantial roles. I think we can serve as a model. We were just in Munich last week, and our CEO was on the stage, and she is very good at being a CEO. But the two women who prepped the managing board member, who is also a woman, are in their 30s, and they both had 3 children apiece under 10. And what we're mirroring to the market is that there is a lot of room if you give people the room to succeed. I myself became a mother later at 44 years old, and I feel a need to speak up and reference my own experience and to use that experience for the purposes of having people understand what a woman at 44, a single woman at 44 as a mother, what people in their 30s are facing, what it means to have an elementary school child during the pandemic, which is very different perhaps than what other board members had, as an older group might have a high schooler or a college-age student. And so part of this is just reflecting your own experience and using your voice in the moment that you can have them, right? Empathy. To use your own experience to help motivate change.
So I wanted to ask Candace for a moment about that, because your mission is to bring women and women of color into the world of technology, like Siemens and other companies like that. And you've chosen the route to mobilize a coalition of more than 20 major companies who have united together to make that possible. I would be curious if you would mind sharing with us from inside the room of the coalition some of the conversations that go on and their collective fervor for tackling one of these issues that ultimately can be best addressed probably from employers.
Mm-hmm. No, so I really love what Camille had to say about providing women with the opportunity to succeed. And so when we take a look at the work that we're doing at Empower, most specifically the Command Shift Coalition, which I have the privilege of leading, we are focused specifically on making sure that we are providing the opportunity to succeed for women of color within the tech industry. And so as we do that, some of the conversations that we talk about very specifically are, what are the barriers? Why aren't women pursuing careers in technology? And what we found is that oftentimes women are not asked. People automatically assume that women aren't interested in technology careers when that could be further from the truth. The other thing that we acknowledge is that a lot of women, especially women of color, have more responsibility as well. And so as we're thinking about programming that can help women pursue careers in technology, to help them sustain those careers, we have to think about opportunities for them to get the support that they need. So that could be having access to healthcare, to transportation, but also having access to childcare as well. You know, you were talking about women at the age of 30 that had 3 young children. That is the reality of the women that we're looking to serve. And what we know is that there's significant underrepresentation of women of color in the tech workforce. In fact, of 4.7 million individuals who are in the current technology workforce, only 5% of them are Black, Latina, or Indigenous women. And so our work within the Command Shift Coalition is to change that. And we believe that in order to do that, we have to first allow women of color to see the opportunities for them within the technology industry, but also we're very focused on engaging our corporate partners, but also inspiring corporations to both hire and retain women of color in tech, right? Because it doesn't help us if we just get them in. We have to make sure that they stay there so that they can benefit from the opportunities that are presented from being able to enter, persist, and thrive in that industry. And then the final piece, which I think is really important that we talk about often within the Command Shift Coalition, is the importance for achieving pay equity, right? How do you make sure that an individual feels included within your industry if they're not receiving equitable pay? And so those are the conversations that we're having.
Crunch. So it's fascinating because I think when we were talking, just a sort of quick, we were talking all of us a little bit about the role sort of like benefits and salaries play in setting the course. And Elizabeth, I know that Levi's has been very engaged in a number of issues. By the way, if you haven't caught the recent issue of Fortune, it already talks about a few things that we've mentioned. One, the role of women CEOs. Obviously, Siemens has a woman CEO. It talks about how purpose, companies are really taking on mammoth purpose-oriented opportunities. So one question I had, it's a 2-part question, get ready.
Right.
Now, don't use your media training and only take the one you want. So one question is the role of benefits within a company, because Levi's is a very purpose-driven enterprise. Just a quick answer on that. And then something that pivots over to Andrew. Your CEO has taken a very clear, motivating, almost coalition-building stance on gun violence in America. I'm wondering if you could reflect on that for us.
Sure. Well, I'll start with the employee and the benefits piece because I think that it's inextricably linked to the decision to take a stand and to be a values-based company. You know, we're old like Siemens, 175, we're a 107-year-old company, and we have over time been led by our values, and I think that we approach a lot of these current issues as business issues, and we're thinking about them in terms of how do they impact our communities where we operate and how do our employees respond. And often when deciding what to take a stand on, it is because we know that there are things that our employees care profoundly about. They come through our employee resource groups, they come through other employee listening channels, but once we've decided that we're going to take a stand on something, whether it's reproductive rights or it's domestic partner benefits, back before that was like a much more common thing.
Fortune compliments you on gun violence.
Yeah, gun violence prevention. Like these are things that we do because we know that employees are asking about them. And once you do it, you also have to make sure that you're providing a workplace environment where employees can be their best selves, where they can show up, where they have the right benefits. So it may be, do we have the right policies in place, gender equity, pay equity? Do we have the right advocacy platforms? And then you kind of take it from there. But we always start with the business problem. We start with the employees. The second part of your question.
The second part of the question, thank you.
The second part of your question was
Gun
coalitions and gun violence.
Yes.
So this again came.
And just to clarify, by
Yeah.
the way, a few years back, your CEO had
Yeah.
a point of view on gun violence, and he reached out to industry, and I think 5 other CEOs
More,
said, I'm with you.
Right.
5 CEOs. And then a few years later, he reaches out, and was it 500 CEOs unite with him? What happens?
Well, I think so. This is one of those, like, our goal is, I think, to be on the right side of history, to take a stand on the issues that matter. Gun violence prevention is something that came from our employees. People were scared. The employees who worked in stores, whether it was open carry or people having guns in the dressing room, trying on pants, What do we want to do? And so the first time we went out, there were not many companies that were willing to kind of use their voice on that issue. When you look at the stuff that's happened over time, this last effort over the summer, there were more than 500 companies that were involved. And I think this is the power of coalitions and what you were talking about, which is, the voice of companies is magnified and it's more resonant when it's part of a chorus, when you're not a lone voice standing alone. You need those companies that will be on the sort of tip of the sword or tip of the spear, but I think you also want companies who can make space for others to then come behind them and to join and to make a greater impact.
That's perfect. Just hold on, because we're going to get into gun violence in 1 second, Ed, chopping. But I wanted to take the values issue that you talked about just 1 second ago and flip over to Peter for a moment. And Peter, I've had the privilege of sort of seeing sort of you as someone who gets to sort of sit in the room a little bit, like really that Camille talked about, when you're in the room with the decision makers. And you had an amazing mentor. You talk about this often, David Finn, your father, who had very clear vision of communications and values, whether it was smoking, whether it was support for funding the arts, when arts were being, that we're talking about now, defunding another part of our social system. But then we talked about defunding the arts. Your father had a point of view. He talked about the importance of rallying to world peace with the United Nations. And I was just curious about when you launched this organization, Finn, you wrote down 7 values. And so I don't want to go over the values, but I wanted to understand, to Elizabeth's point about a 170-year-old company with values, what it was like to step off of another enterprise, create a whole new enterprise. Day one, write down, I'm told that was a napkin or an envelope, you were Lincoln-esque, write down 7 points that were fundamental to how you wanted this organization to evolve. What was going through your head at that moment?
So, Gil, my father was an idealist, and I was very much inspired by him. One of our founding values is for us to use our collective abilities to make the world a better place. I have a 2-page letter about our values, which every one of our 1,400 employees has read. Every new hire gets it as part of the welcome package. But that value of working to make the world a better place really came out of almost 15 years of experience I had outside the workplace, which you and I have talked a lot about. So I'll try and briefly tell that story. My family has owned property in the town of Hunter in upstate New York for over 100 years, and I took over that property in the early 1990s. The community was in the midst of a downward spiral. In the mid-90s, a third of the buildings on Main Street were for sale. Buildings were collapsing on Main Street. There were no buyers for the buildings on Main Street. And we really hit rock bottom. This was my weekend home. My wife and I would go there with our kids every weekend. The community hit rock bottom in 1997. First, I should say, the community had turned into a rough bar town. And we hit rock bottom when there were 2 late-night barroom murders. And it was like, oh my God, we got to get out of here. But that's not what our response was. We got to get out of here. My wife and I had read stories about communities that had been turned around through an arts-based initiative, economic revitalization initiative, and we said, well, maybe we can help make a difference here. So we started an arts organization in early 1998 called the Catskill Mountain Foundation, and in almost 25 years, we've presented almost 1,000 performances, thousands of films. We have a studio art school. We've raised and generated, I think, over $60 million that's been invested in the community, and others have followed. I will say it took far longer than I expected. 10 years later, it's like, nothing's changed, what's wrong? But then 15, 16 years later, it really started to accelerate, and now all the for sale signs are gone, all the availabilities have been purchased and renovated. It's hard to find people to hire. Before, people had to go off the mountaintop to get a job. Now, the local economy is doing extremely well. It took almost 25 years for the transformation to take place. But the lesson I learned from that, and I work with many other people, we built a coalition of people trying to make a difference. A lesson I learned from that is it'll take a long time, stick to it, but you can make the world a better place.
You and Robert Gibbs should get together, right? He said 11 years, you 25.
Yeah. So that experience is really what led to when I launched Fin Partners almost 11 years ago, to one of our values being make the world a better place.
So, Andrew, I want to get back to something that connects you with Elizabeth. Obviously, value-based organizations was a great time, but gun violence.
Yeah, I'm going to jump around.
You're gonna jump around. Okay,
yeah,
do that.
As I told you, I probably would. So actually,
You feel connected to everybody.
Yeah, well, the stories of equity and pathways, and Peter and I have talked about this, and the work that universities do, of course, is often about transforming social mobility and access. And 2 weeks ago, we had a regional conference on food insecurity among students. 30% of our students in the region face food insecurity while they are students. And our coalition, our consortium, includes community colleges, historically black colleges and universities, the only university in the world focused on serving the deaf and hard of hearing community. And to hear that so many of those students couldn't get access to food. And one of our speakers, I got to tell you a little bit about Estelia, comes with her baby in her arms apologizing to me that she has to bring her baby because her daycare fell through that day. So she needed to keep one of her 3 children with her. She is a community college student working full-time, trying to get into the tech industry. So she's exactly the kind of student that we all want to help. And that's what universities traditionally do. We help with workforce development, we help with pathways. But as you think about our commitment to the region, one of the reasons that I took this position and work with our presidents is around broader, bolder initiatives. So not only equitable economic development, but how can we be invested in affordable housing? How can we expand access to food? And one of the areas our presidents have led on is looking at ways we can dynamically and in innovative ways approach reduction of gun violence. So we have a coalition across all of our universities coming together with top experts from around the world, but particularly from our 20 institutions, focused on innovative approaches, everything from what businesses can do, like the incredible work that Levi's is leading, to work in polarization online. And there's a model out of AU, out of the Peril Group at American University, that talks about inoculating people against extremism online. It's some really remarkable work. So it's very exciting to bring together, and I'm basically the herder of cats, as we talked about with many of our coalitions, getting the opportunity to bring these diverse experts together and find the areas of intersection where we believe we can make a difference in our region and in the world.
I'm fascinated by the amount of effort that goes in for all of you in terms of building consortiums, coalitions, internally within your organization. How many locations do you have altogether that you or
We're in all 50 states and 190 countries.
So you have to build, and you have communicators in all those states. You have to build, in essence, a consortium of like-minded people throughout. So each of you are really building sort of a sense of unity. So I wanted to ask sort of a question that in the political world seems to escape us. What's the secret of getting people in a fractured tribal world when we need to have some sense of purpose? As I said earlier, my 28-year-old sees us as a nation in conflict. You're trying to create business communities of harmony. Is there a secret to this? Is there a special ingredient so that we don't have to be as frustrated? And actually, my advice often to colleagues is find an organization that is based in justice and values, and now work through your organization. Be involved in the system, absolutely, but find a business community of people who you can believe in that will represent your needs. So I wanted to ask you, Camille, what's your secret in getting all of these colleagues and the C-suite to sort of say, yeah, we're going to do that?
Yeah, I don't think there's a secret sauce. It's hard work. And I think every instance it's different. If you go back during the pandemic to the vaccine mandate, for example, Siemens is a federal contractor, and all 29,000 employees in the US were subject to the vaccine mandate because we were a federal contractor. We lost some very good employees because of that. You have to assume that both our management team and our employee base is on the right and on the left in this environment, right? So the coalition was built around the fact that as a business, as a federal contractor, this is an obligation for us, right? It's not a choice. And when you bring things like that to the table, it is easier to make tough decisions because there is a line in the sand that everybody has to agree to cross over. And once you cross over together, you hold hands and you move together in that environment. But I don't think any of these issues are easy. And to avoid tribalism, I think you have to actually use transparency and get everybody to put their cards on the table, listen. But people, employees in particular, do expect their companies to do something once they've been listened to.
Andrew, what's your secret?
Well,
you're a consortium leader.
I agree, there's no one
hurting
secret, but
cats.
the idea of listening and finding the areas of interest, universities, as you and I talked about, are too often focus of polarization. They're believed instead of sources of education by some factions to be sources of discourse, sources of polarization, sources of indoctrination, as some would suggest, which I think is quite the opposite, where we can play the role of conveners of diverse views, where we can bring folks together who really disagree to talk substantively about issues and questions, whether it be the environment or affordable housing or gun violence. We can allow enough oxygen in the room to do, and Elizabeth, you said this beautifully in the room before, about the listening, not only to the different coalitions, but to our own team members, our students and our staff members.
Candace.
No, I think that the work that we're doing on the Command Shift Coalition that really gets people to listen is that we lead with data. And I know that it's hard to say that in a time where there is fake news and fake facts, but leading with data is at the core of the work that we're doing. And we had the opportunity to release some research that has really galvanized our coalition members. And so in addition to leading with the data, it's providing our coalition members with opportunities to learn from one another. It's really great when you can be in the room and listen to Citi and the work that they're doing around diversity, equity, and inclusion, as well as AWS and also organizations like Comcast, NBC Universal. It's interesting to be able to listen to their experiences, learn from that, and apply it to the work that you're doing. And so that's what we're looking to do within our coalition. And in addition to that, continue to advance the work to increase women in tech.
Well, I love everything you guys have said. I mean, it is hard work and it is so important. And this is why I think things like this event, networking, and getting to be part of these coalitions is great, because it's nice to also know what are other people doing. You're not the only one facing it. I mean, that's what it's like. Sometimes it feels like, these are such big, thorny issues, but having people that you can contact. And then I think being guided by your values. And, all of our employees, all of our stakeholders, they might not necessarily agree with exactly what we're doing, but if we're guided by our values and we're making the right choices, then I think that, we can feel, and our teams can feel like they're part of something bigger that they can believe in.
So before we get to Peter, because I'm going to ask Peter a unique question, I just want to summarize. You really talked about transparency. You, Andrew, talked about, in a way, almost like martial arts, using the disagreement, the energy to get people involved. Candace, you talked about facts and looking at the issues, bringing people together about their passion to resolve. Elizabeth, you really touched on something really precious as well, which is the power of listening to people and listening in a way that they feel heard, that their words will be acted upon. Peter, I wanted to get your reflection. You've heard all this, and the struggle to build organizations successfully around values. You're about to take your hunter experience and pivot. And was it 20 years ago, I think you said to me, you had a vision that from the hunter experience, when it was going well initially, finally, you said, I hope I could mobilize CEOs around America to adopt a rural community. And now you're about to make an announcement to do something.
We're going to help launch a new initiative, a coalition, to improve wellness in rural communities throughout America. So yes, I once had an idea of creating an Adopt a Village movement to get others to replicate what I was doing. I never did that, but in a way, this is finally an initiative that we'll be doing with other organizations, and we're going to invite other agencies to join us in this initiative too.
So you're driven to make a difference every day.
Correct.
As are your colleagues here. I want to thank you. Really, we got down to the essence of the theme of this meeting. And what I take away also is what I said to my wife to tell my daughter in about a week and a half from now, which is be optimistic. We're at a particular political point in time. I should have empathy for her. I should be a good listener. I should help her connect with other people who are like-minded so that she draws strength from them. And I should have hope and tell her to lean in and make a difference, as all of these agencies and enterprises should. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gil.